So I fully acknowledge I'm very likely to be in the minority with this topic, and I did skirt across it once or twice in other videos, but man, I am so not convinced of what I'm going to talk about to be the case. A Nintendo Direct has happened, some big cool announcements and trailers regarding plenty of games: Pikmin 4, Metroid Prime 1 Remaster, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Kart DLC, Splatoon 3 DLC, Xenoblade 3 DLC, Kirby, Game Boy on NSO, Baten Kaitos, Professor Layton. All this stuff, it laid the groundwork for what to expect for the next 6 months largely, the first half of 2023. It was fun, most seem to have enjoyed it a lot, especially compared to previous early year directs, which is awesome, and the first half of 2023 looks to be a very solid year for Nintendo all around. But before and after this direct, as well as even right as this year started, there are so many people, Nintendo fans, Nintendo content creators, that are all talking about the idea that this is it. I don't mean like the actual final year, but this year being the last big year for the Switch. Zelda, Pikmin, Metroid, Kirby, Mario Kart DLC, Splatoon DLC, Xenoblade DLC, Fire Emblem DLC, Bayonetta Origins, plus Fire Emblem came out this year too, Baten Kaitos remasters, all these varied remasters, re-releases, prequel/spin-offs, DLC, new games altogether, etc. And not only is that not everything we know about, that's largely just the first half of this year. That's mostly up until July. That's a pretty strong amount for the year, and yet that's only for the next 6 months right now. But because this feels like a huge blowout direct and a big period of time with so many big releases for most people, it's instilled this idea that this is the Switch's last major year, that 2023 is going to be the last like big blowout type of year, you know what I mean? Under most circumstances for any system, 7 years is usually the lifespan on a system until it gets discontinued and rolled out for a new one. Sometimes a little less, like with GameCube, other times a little more, like with the Wii, but for most video game platforms for the longest time, 7 is usually that benchmark for a console's lifespan. That's the primary reason to why tons believe this is the Switch's last quote-unquote big major year with a huge variety of games. Come March, next month, literally a month from now, we are quite literally entering year 7 of the Switch. That is wild. Time flew insanely fast with this thing. We're already approaching the 7th year into its lifespan. So again, under usual circumstances, I'd agree with the idea that this year's the last major bash for the system before it starts to peter out and gradually slow it down on major updates and releases. Furthermore, there was that whole talk of there being a major Switch revision or Switch Pro, an upgraded model of the system. But between chip shortages, the continued increasing success of the current Switch, and the pandemic, it was led to be believed Nintendo just decided to scrap it altogether and invest in a new system right away. And there are so many things in my life that I have been wrong about. I have been very wrong before. This can easily be one of those things I'm just wrong on again. Everything surrounding this topic's speculative on every side anyways, and this could be another one of those videos where it ages poorly for just being a very wrong prediction or thought process. But still, despite this is a discussion over video gaming, it's nothing ever serious or so immensely investing in emotion. I struggle to think this is the console's last major hurrah of its life. The swan song and twilight year/twilight hours of the Switch, I still firmly believe, are a couple more years down the road. My main thing that's keeping me from thinking we're nearing the end of this, multiple times recently, have multiple big executives and people actually running Nintendo state the Switch basically passing its halfway mark/midpoint. In 2020, Doug Bowser basically said this, referring to Shintaro Furukawa, mentioning this in a fiscal meeting prior to entering 2021. Both American and Japanese presidents for Nintendo, with Furukawa reinstating last year, we're still essentially around that midpoint start, and all of these surrounding these guys and others emphasizing the Switch's massive momentum that just won't stop. Narrowed to just these claims by these major executives, that obviously goes against both the idea of this being the last year for the console, as well as the last big, major bombastic year for the system. But I also look at everything the Switch is currently doing, and that idea makes less sense still. Even last year was pretty dang good for the system between a 3D Kirby, 2 new mainline Pokemon games, Splatoon 3, Xenoblade 3, Mario plus Rabbids, Bayonetta 3, even Nintendo Switch Sports selling insanely well, 8 million, Fire Emblem Warriors, Mario Kart DLC, and a bunch of other games. That is a pretty strong year and well balanced, and compared to this year, you not only still have that last third of the year, a decent chunk, just completely blank, all of these games and soon releases and other investments Nintendo's making right now, adding stuff to their online infrastructure, NSO adding more and more of these systems and libraries and such. They're still putting in so much into the Switch right now that nothing's concretely pointing to us getting or knowing of a new Nintendo system anytime soon. I obviously want a stronger Switch, everyone does at this point. For as cool and neat as the Switch is, especially compared to every other console out there right now on the other hand, it is very underpowered and plenty of games could stand to use not even just graphical tweaks and improvements, mainly performance boosts. Frame rate, rendering, games just running better basically if the Switch had more powerful hardware built into it. Something people wanted a Switch Pro to do, but would make sense for a successor to do too. None of this is me saying I want the Switch to last forever, or be Nintendo's last system. I want there to be a new system. But between all of this, the fact that last year to 2 years ago was the halfway point, I have sincere doubts of us knowing of a new system anytime soon. At least not for another year, maybe even 2 or at tops 3. Like when the Switch is selling and performing unbelievably well consistently the past couple of years, even with the pandemic almost 3 years ago, even when all these first parties and even third parties and other games are selling record-breaking numbers in dozens of different ways, and when Nintendo's gone on record saying they want the Switch to last longer than your average console's life, how does any of that line up with the assumption this is the last major year for the Switch? I don't think that makes any sense. Successors inherently draw attention, buzz, drive, and sales away from their predecessor to their next new system. And when the Switch is still going strong in many different ways, there's not really much of a reason to significantly neuter that when it's still going super strong and when Nintendo still has high hopes for the system, even after everything it's achieved already. Like, it sounds counterintuitive to do it this soon when everything's going so smoothly and strong still. Yeah, August onward basically is completely blank, but that doesn't inherently equal Nintendo has borderline nothing left for the system, or we're on the horizon of a new system and knowing about it. I feel like if we were approaching a final major blowout year, or even an actual final year where there was less games than before, like with 3DS, we would know. Like, we would really know. We would know whether or not we're approaching a final major year for the thing. That, and say Nintendo does have some new system planned. 2 things I think we can all agree on is 1, even when it eventually comes out, they'll likely do simultaneous releases for it, like the next system getting new games for it and the Switch also getting some games at the same time. Basically like with the 3DS going out relatively strong in 2016 with Pokemon and other games, but getting games 2 years into the Switch's life, or back with the Game Boy lasting so long into the Color as well before shutting down, eventually dwindling into the unironic final years of the thing, like how 3DS got Metroid Samus Returns and WarioWare Gold as the actual swan songs for it. And 2, there's no way it is not a literal Switch revision or type of Switch. Nintendo struck gold with their Switch and how it's designed. This balance of mobile and console gaming, focusing all of their eggs into one basket as opposed to 2, the hundreds of unbelievably amazing games spread so stupidly far across their massive first-party catalog, and hundreds of great third-party games, indie games, massive support, eventual online overhaul, etc., and trying to maintain some of this with NSO, meant to be sustainable for a longer period of time compared to the eShops and whatnot. Not only is backwards compatibility going to be a major thing everyone wants going into that next system, assuming it's a stronger Switch, it makes no sense for Nintendo to try to completely deviate from what the Switch managed to attract and pull off when it's one of the most lucrative consoles and investments Nintendo's ever made. Better be called Super Nintendo Switch. That is a clever title, we all know it. Just call the next system Super Nintendo Switch. Stronger hardware, better frame rate and performance, it's more stable, better loading, some stronger graphical output and or resolution scaling and such. The next system can literally be a much stronger Switch. A ton of people will be on board. But it is mad hard to envision the base framework for what the Switch is to not be in that next system. That's at least for whenever we get that new system, but back to this year itself, yeah, we have a new Fire Emblem, new Zelda, new Pikmin, major remasters for Kirby, Metroid, Baten Kaitos, and more DLC expansions for Mario Kart Splatoon 3 and Xenoblade 3, Mario + Rabbids Sparks of Hope, all of which being substantial DLC, all of these games being designed as these evergreen, incredibly dense games meant to last for years and be played and talked about for multiple years long after launch, upon even more games and major releases, not even counting the Mario movie. That is a very solid year for Nintendo already. But we don't even know what fall and the holidays for 2023 look like. We don't know if Nintendo has some major release for that holiday, and say we fast forwarded to 2024. I fully think that could also be another strong year for the system as well. We still don't know anything about Metroid Prime 4 yet. We don't know if Nintendo has any plans for a new major mainline release for either 2D Mario or 3D Mario. We don't know if Nintendo has interest in what other Mario spin-offs they may want on Switch, like Mario Party, Baseball, another Paper Mario, Dr. Mario, Mario and Luigi and whatnot. We don't know if Nintendo has interest in making a new big Donkey Kong game. We don't know if Nintendo wants to remake or remaster more Zeldas, like with Link's Awakening. We don't know if Nintendo and other companies have interest in reviving other dormant IPs, like Punch-Out, Kid Icarus, Wario Land, Star Fox, F-Zero and whatnot. If they want to continue ARMS, Ring Fit, other series, if they have another brand new IP or series they want to introduce either here or with the next system, the inevitable possibility of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet getting DLC this year, as well on top of whatever else, if they have even more remasters, remakes, new games, smaller games, or other ideas for Metroid, for Kirby, WarioWare, Fire Emblem, hell, old-ass series like Ice Climbers getting reimagined upon plenty of other completely original or new series and ideas. Some of all of this is 100% going to be applicable for the rest of this year, the Pokemon stuff, maybe Metroid, but nothing saying even half of this can't be true for next year. Again, if we were approaching that final massive hurrah year for the Switch, we would definitely know. I think it's a little bit too vague and foggy to immediately think we're entering the Switch's last major year, when Nintendo's designed a lot around the Switch to last longer than the 7-year benchmark, and when they have no reason to do so, even when they can make Switch 1 and Switch 2 coexist for a couple years once we enter 2024, on top of the execs saying multiple times, yeah, a year ago, we're basically at the halfway point. There's still so much buzz, praise, marketing, and love for so many currently available and new games coming soon. Just an insane amount of momentum the Switch is not losing or faltering on at all, that I can't fathom Nintendo would risk jeopardizing all of that towards the end of this year. Even with plenty of releases this year being remasters like Kirby, Metroid, Button Kaitos and such, and the DLC expansions, millions agree that still makes for a strong year for Nintendo when that's being added amongst major new titles a la Zelda and Pikmin. Say they do that again next year with other games on top of other new major releases next year, that wouldn't be another great year like this one's looking thus far? Say our holiday game this year is, quote-unquote, objectively Pokemon DLC, but also for hypotheticals, Metroid Prime 4. That takes place, and they have a huge new 2D or 3D game for Mario next year, a Mario spinoff, a big new DK game, some major release for 1 or 2 dormant IPs, a Fire Emblem remaster, the very likely scenario of Tears of the Kingdom getting DLC, Pikmin 4, maybe getting some 2, potentially more than that, on top of the lucrative third-party support and indies like Nintendo's gotten legit every year for the system. Maybe cross off the Fire Emblem thing or the Mario spin-off thing. That is definitely not a win per year. That's at least better than 2018. Basically, there's still plenty of room for Nintendo to pour plenty into 2024 and make that another banger year before we could start approaching a new Nintendo system. I feel like it's too soon to make the judgment call, you know? I know I'm one of the first creators to say the opposite as far as this, so I'm not expecting a lot of people to agree with me on this sentiment, but I genuinely don't think it's that soon to say we're approaching a new system when I feel 2024 could hold more surprises and cool stuff than we think for Nintendo and the Switch, and when Nintendo's gone on record for saying, showing, and proving otherwise. We'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts on the matter down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and I'll pop in again in the future for more Nintendo topics, games to discuss, and analyze. Stay super.
Yo, hey, 妹妹，嘿，我来呀！够暖，大怕怕呀！拉面，嘿，来面，来根面，共舞再见呀！哈哈，拉面，上手面，谢谢。